Okay, let's unpack this. When most people hear Stoic, they get this very specific picture. Isolation, maybe suppressing emotions.
Right, like some kind of perfectly self-sufficient hermit, someone who's pulled back from all the messiness of, well, human life.
Yeah, the ultimate individualist, totally focused inward, maybe standing alone on some metaphorical mountaintop.
And look, that image, it's probably one of the most stubborn and honestly quite damaging misunderstandings of what ancient Stoicism was actually about.
It really is.
Because the sources we have, they just couldn't be clearer. The ancient Stoics, I mean, think about Epictetus teaching even while in exile, or Marcus Aurelius running an entire empire.
Right.
They saw humans not just as rational beings, but as fundamentally social. And political animals, too. They didn't run away from the world, not at all. They were all about preparing to engage with it effectively.
Exactly. And we've got this deep stack of sources, Seneca's letters, the discourses, the meditations, and they're just packed with advice on social duty.
Absolutely packed.
They give really rigorous guidance on how you build deep, virtuous friendships, how you navigate tricky community stuff. So today, our mission really is to dive into all that guidance. We want to explore the high value the Stoics put on finding the right kind of allies, those virtuous ones, and how they manage to keep their own integrity, when surrounded by imperfect people, which is everyone, right?
Pretty much.
And maybe most importantly, how they saw all that inner philosophical work, that self-mastery, not as the end goal, but as the essential preparation for getting out there and doing your social duty.
And that right there is the fundamental shift in perspective you need to grasp. The Stoic path isn't about finding inner peace just so you can have a quiet retirement from life.
No.
The core idea, the real key concept, is that mastering yourself, getting control over your volition, your proheresis, as they called it, that's the necessary condition before you can even hope to engage effectively with others. I mean, think about it. If your mind is just churning with irrational fear or jealousy or maybe uncontrolled anger, how can you possibly act justly or kindly towards anyone?
You can't. You're compromised from the start.
Exactly. So that inner peace, that tranquility, it's the foundation. It's what lets you act virtuously in whatever social role you find yourself in. We master the self so that we can serve the community. That's the sequence.
Okay, so let's start with that foundation then. The groundwork. It makes sense, right? The Stoics knew you can't build a solid house on shaky ground.
Right.
So the absolute prerequisite for forming any kind of really meaningful Stoic relationship has to be mastering yourself first, individually.
Yes. Epictetus is incredibly focused on this. He basically tells you, look, first things first, go form a certain character and pattern for yourself and do it when you're alone.
Alone. Why alone, specifically?
Well, solitude, in the Stoic view, isn't meant to be like a permanent state. It's the training gym. If you're constantly bombarded by what everyone else thinks and does, you never really get a chance to figure out who you are, separate from all that noise.
Makes sense.
So Epictetus demands that you sort of hammer out your moral principles, your habits, in private first. What are you actually going to stand for? What will you pursue? What will you refuse to do? You need to establish that baseline.
And once you've got that pattern set, then going back into the social world, well, that becomes the real test, doesn't it?
That's the crucible. Epictetus warns you, when you then interact with people, the critical task, the absolute main job, is to remain true to who you are.
Because if that inner character is still wishy-washy or just undefined.
Yeah, the moment some strong external force hits you, maybe it's a demanding boss or a neighbor who's always criticizing or even just a friend who's obsessed with money.
Right.
If you don't have that internal anchor, you'll just get pulled along, instantly swayed. You've got to have something solid inside to protect your values.
Okay, so this leads us straight into that core Epictetan idea, the engine room you mentioned. Proheresis, autonomous volition.
Exactly. Proheresis. This is the domain, the sphere where we are, according to Epictetus, fully autonomous. It's where we govern our mental and moral stuff, our reason, our desires, our intentions, what we choose to assent to.
And here's where it gets really interesting, maybe even counterintuitive. The sources argue that mastering this field, this internal world, mastering the self, it's actually not a selfish act. It flips the whole popular idea on its head.
It really does. Because the argument is that this self-concern, achieving this inner tranquility, is the essential condition for acting well in every single social role you have, and for caring effectively about other people.
How does that actually work, though? Like, in practice, if I manage to master my anger, let's say, how does that concretely change how I deal with, I don't know, that annoying colleague or a really demanding family member?
Okay, good question. So by mastering your anger, you're essentially removing the irrational static from your response system. If a colleague is annoying, the person who hasn't mastered themselves just lashes out. Right? They're driven by those destructive emotions we talked about.
Yeah. Knee-jerk reaction.
And that reaction, it's compromised. It probably leads to conflict, maybe damaged relationships, maybe unprofessional behavior, none of which actually serves the common good or even your own long-term good.
Right.
But the person who has mastered their volition, they see the colleague's annoying behavior for what it is, something external, ultimately indifferent. It's not a true evil in the Stoic sense.
Because only vice is truly evil.
Exactly. So because they see it clearly, they can respond with rational judgment. They can focus on the actual goal, maybe finishing the project together, instead of just getting that immediate emotional release of yelling back.
So that tranquility, that inner calm, is what enables the right action.
It's the essential condition. It's what allows you to act well in all these roles, to actually care effectively about others. It shifts the whole game.
Yeah, it moves the focus away from just managing feelings, which can feel exhausting, towards actually executing virtue.
Precisely. If you're internally peaceful, you just have the right disposition. You're equipped to interact with the world using the virtues justice, fairness, honesty, without being constantly yanked around by envy or jealousy or fear.
And this inner work connects directly to that idea of a philosophical therapy, right? Therapia.
Yes, absolutely. Therapia. Philosophical self-correction. And the sources show this wasn't just like casual navel-gazing. It was hard work. It required constant effort.
Like Marcus Aurelius talking about his teacher Rusticus.
Exactly. Marcus literally says Rusticus showed him he needed moral training and Stoic psychological therapy, therapia. This wasn't optional reading. It was dedicated discipline. It was about making yourself fit for purpose, fit for public life.
That initial discipline sounds, well, incredibly demanding. What's the end state? What kind of readiness does it give you?
Marcus describes the goal state beautifully. He says it's about being pure, undisturbed by a crowd of imaginations, and ever calm and well-pleased.
And that state, that calm, that purity is what makes you ready to serve. Think about it. If a leader, or even just a friend giving advice, is internally a mess full of confusion, anger, fear, their decisions are going to be flawed.
Of course.
You just can't effectively lead a community or even properly counsel a friend if your own internal citadel is constantly being stormed by irrational passions.
Right.
You have to fortify the inner self first. That's the prerequisite before you can open the gates and act effectively, principle-driven, out in the world.
Okay, so building on that idea of getting your inner house in order first.
Right.
Let's think about the risks, the strategic risks the Stoics saw when that inner state is threatened.
Right.
Once we've sort of established that autonomous character, who do we actually let get close? Who gets access? And this is where the Stoics get really, really discerning about friendship.
Yes, and this section brings in a really crucial Stoic distinction about social life. It's nuanced.
Well, they recognized we have certain social duties that are just mandatory. Obligations to family, to the state, to our community. And fulfilling these duties means we have to interact with all sorts of people.
Right, including, as the sources say, annoying, misguided, or malicious people. You
Exactly.
can't always pick your colleagues or your neighbor.
Exactly. You can't be selective when it comes to just doing your basic duty to work for the common interest. Sometimes you have to deal with difficult people.
But, and this is the key distinction, when it comes to voluntary friendship, the people you choose to bring close.
Then you absolutely must be selective. For the Stoics, choosing friends wasn't just, finding people to hang out with for fun. It was treated like a serious, long-term philosophical project.
Not just a leisure activity, it sounds almost like self-preservation.
In a way, yes, philosophical self-preservation, and it's driven by this real fear of contamination.
Contamination. That sounds strong.
It is strong. The Stoic recommendation is pretty stark. Avoid befriending people whose core values have been corrupted.
Why? What's the fear?
The fear is that their flawed values, maybe their obsession with money or status or just fleeting pleasures, will inevitably rub off on you. They'll contaminate yours.
Like osmosis.
Kind of. If you constantly hang around people who think wealth is the highest good, it's almost inevitable that your own internal standard for what makes a good life will start to drift. You know that saying, you become the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with?
Yeah, I've heard that.
Well, the Stoics would say that applies morally, too.
Okay, so we're not just dodging the corrupted influences. We should also be actively seeking out allies who actually reinforce our goals. Who are we looking for then? specifically?
We should be looking for friends who genuinely share our values, proper Stoic values, that is. People who prioritize virtue, reason, duty.
Makes sense. But there's more to it, right?
Yes, crucially, the advice is to seek out those who are actually doing a better job than we are at living by these values.
Ooh, okay. So it's not just about shared values, but about finding role models.
Role models and learning partners. The whole relationship should be a kind of mutual learning experience. You work hard to emulate them, to learn what you can from how they handle things. You see them as companions, yes, but also as moral guides.
But wait, how do you stop that from becoming some kind of weird competitive status game?
Yeah.
Constantly ranking your friends to see who's better.
Yeah.
That feels a bit off.
That's a really good practical point, and the Stoic answer is clear. The measure of better isn't about external stuff. It's not about their job title or how much money they have or even if they've published philosophy books.
Okay, so what is it about?
It's strictly defined by the consistency of their prohairesis, their inner state, their choices.
Do you give examples?
Sure. Are they resilient when things go wrong externally? Are they consistently honest even when it's hard? How do they handle criticism or correction? Do they do it with humility?
Ah, okay. It's about their demonstrated character in action.
Exactly. And the goal isn't necessarily to find the perfect sage, that mythical, flawless, wise person. The Stoics knew those are incredibly rare, maybe even non-existent.
So what's the alternative?
Instead, we look for the prokoptontes. That's the term they used. It means those who are making progress, people who are genuinely, visibly striving towards virtue, even if they stumble sometimes, like us.
The prokoptontes.
Yeah.
Progressors. That feels much more realistic and maybe more powerful, like being in a study group together.
That's a great analogy. And this is exactly what Marcus Aurelius found in his mentors, right? People like Rusticus, Apollonius, Sextus. They weren't just teachers in a formal sense.
No, they were more than that.
They served as powerful models, showing him what Stoicism looked like as a lived reality. And they were mentors, offering very direct guidance and, importantly, moral correction.
That dynamic, the mentor-progressor thing, seems absolutely key.
Okay.
And it brings us right back to that fascinating, kind of revealing story Marcus tells about Rusticus.
Yes, where he says he loved Rusticus dearly, but...
He also found him exasperating at times.
Right.
Exasperating.
Now, why on earth would a true philosophical friend, someone you love, be exasperating? That seems completely counterintuitive to how we think about friendship today. Comfort, support, making you feel good.
Because, and this is crucial, a true Stoic friend isn't there just to flatter you or make you comfortable. They're a truth teller. Rusticus exasperated Marcus precisely because he was doing his job as a Stoic friend. He frequently pointed out Marcus's character flaws. He highlighted where the emperor, his friend, was falling short of his own principles.
Wow, that takes courage on both sides.
It's a profound commitment. Stoic friendship means prioritizing your friend's moral growth above their temporary comfort or emotional ease.
Yeah.
If your friend is willing to risk making you feel a bit uncomfortable or even exasperated for the sake of your long-term character development, that, in the Stoic view, is a sign of deep, rational love, real friendship.
So pursuing this kind of friendship is actually a really demanding path. It requires humility from you to accept that correction.
And courage from your friend to actually give it honestly.
Right. So what's the payoff? What does the Stoic actually get out of this difficult selective process? It doesn't sound easy.
Well, the payoff isn't fleeting pleasure or constant comfort. It's something much deeper. Making this kind of concerted progress towards virtue, especially alongside others doing the same.
Yes.
It yields a sustainable, a non-trivial form of what they called eudaimonia, flourishing. It might be a less than perfect version compared to the sages, but it's real.
So it's a well-being based on progress, not just pleasure.
Exactly. And that kind of progress-based well-being is best achieved when you're surrounded by people who are demanding the highest standards of character from you and from themselves.
Okay, we absolutely have to tackle the elephant in the room. That persistent image of the unfeeling, cold Stoic.
Right. The philosophical robot.
Yeah. If the goal is all self-mastery and virtue, does that just mean we shut down all emotions, become cold fish?
It's a fair question, given some of the early texts.
But our sources, especially the later Roman Stoics like Seneca, they really clarify this, don't they? They seem to introduce a really necessary modification.
They absolutely do. Look, the early Greek Stoics, some of them held what even Seneca later called an unusually harsh and strange theory.
which was
The really radical view argued that the perfect sage would achieve apathy of freedom from those destructive passions so completely,
that they wouldn't even cry.
exactly, that they wouldn't even weep if a close friend died. Because the thinking went, strong emotions like grief must come from false beliefs, like the false belief that death is inherently bad, when for Stoics, it's an external indifferent.
Wow, that is harsh.
It is. And Seneca, writing later, just flat out rejected this. He called it inhuman.
Inhuman, strong word. Why did he draw the line there? What was the philosophical basis for pushing back against that earlier really stark view?
Seneca made a really important distinction. He differentiated between natural, sort of involuntary physical reactions and those truly destructive internal judgments, the pathy.
Okay, explain that difference.
So he argued that maybe a tear rolling down your cheek or an involuntary groan of sorrow when you hear bad news. These are often initial physical responses, almost reflexes. He sometimes called them propathii, proto-emotions.
Proto-emotions, like pre-emotions.
Sort of. They're not necessarily the soul-crushing, judgment-fueled passions that derail your reason. They're part of our shared human makeup. And Seneca insisted, very clearly, he said something like, I do not remove the sage from the general category of mankind, nor do I deny him a sense of pain as if he were some kind of rock with no feelings at all.
That's a huge clarification.
It is. He's saying grief, within limits, is wholly appropriate. It's rational, as long as that grief doesn't spiral into the false judgment that this loss is some ultimate catastrophe that destroys your own capacity for virtue.
So the mature Stoic, the wise person, absolutely can have friends and can grieve within limits at the loss of one.
Oh.
Okay, that validates a certain level of genuine human feeling.
That-
So if they reject the destructive, excessive emotions, the pather, what's the category of good, appropriate, rational affection that they do embrace?
That's where the eupathii come in.
Eupathii.
Literally means something like good effective responses or good feelings. These are seen as rational, appropriate feelings that actually reflect proper human functioning when reason is firmly in charge.
What kind of feelings fall into this category?
Well, the texts talk about certain forms of joy, a kind of rational delight in virtue, rational caution as opposed to irrational fear, and rational wish or will as opposed to uncontrolled desire.
And love and friendship.
Yes, appropriate forms of love and friendship absolutely fall under this umbrella of eupathii.
So this confirms it then. Being a Stoic doesn't mean you only help others in some kind of cold, detached, clinical way.
Not at all. It actually requires what some scholars call effectively engaged other concern. Your care for others should be real, it can be warm, but it's driven and guided by your rational commitment to their actual well-being, their virtue.
That's such a crucial point. It feels much more human. It's not about being a robot. It's about making sure the object of your affection is chosen wisely and that the affection itself is measured by reason.
Precisely. And that leads to the question. What is the wise object of Stoic love or friendship? What are they really focusing on?
What do the sources say?
Well, wise friendship tends to regard all those external things like physical closeness or shared hobbies or even the friend's worldly success or comfort as preferable, sure, but ultimately inconsequential to the core of the friendship.
Okay, so if you love your friend just because they make you laugh or because they live nearby and it's convenient, that's based on externals.
From a strict Stoic perspective, yes. Those things are nice, but they aren't the real substance. The true object of wise love, the sources suggest, is focused on the qualities and activities of others as agents.
As agents, meaning?
Meaning their capacity for choice, their character, specifically the reasoning powers of those others, their prohairesis.
Wow. Okay, so that totally reframes the purpose of friendship again. We're not just connected by shared circumstances or liking the same music. We're connected by a deep, shared interest in each other's moral and intellectual growth.
Exactly. The relationship is fundamentally about mutual character development. It's built on, as one text puts it, a tender interest in the personal and intellectual development of the other. That's the model.
A tender interest. I like that phrasing.
It shows warmth, but directed towards the core of the person.
And this explains why correcting a friend isn't seen as picking a fight, but actually becomes a kind of moral duty.
Yes. It flows directly from that concern for their reasoning power.
And this even extends into situations where a friend genuinely wrongs you. Seneca gives some really robust advice on this, doesn't he? It seems like a masterclass in how to respond without losing your own cool.
Absolutely. He says correction should be made, and get this, by admonition and also by force, gently and also roughly.
Whoa, by force. That sounds intense.
Well, force there probably means firm action or consequence, not necessarily physical violence. But the range, gentle, rough, shows flexibility. But then comes the absolute paramount rule.
Which is,
It should not be made in anger, ever.
okay, why is the absence of anger so critical?
Because the motivation completely changes the moral nature of the act. If you correct someone out of anger, what are you really doing?
Getting back at them, letting off steam.
Exactly. You're acting for retribution, trying to satisfy your own hurt feelings, and in doing so, you compromise your own virtue. You're acting out of passion, not reason.
But if you correct without anger,
Then your purpose shifts entirely. The goal becomes purely for the wrongdoer's own good. You're trying to deter them from repeating the mistake to help steer them back towards reason and virtue.
so the correction or the punishment, it has to be, as Seneca says, an expression not of anger but of caution.
Precisely. Think of it like a doctor applying a treatment that might be painful, but is necessary for the patient's health. The doctor's aim is only the patient's recovery.
Not revenge on the illness.
Right. The moment your own anger enters the equation, the act stops being about the other person's good and becomes about your feelings. And that's where you lose the Stoic plot.
Okay, so we've built the foundation of self-mastery. We've carefully chosen our virtuous allies. Now we zoom out. We shift from those close friendships to the wider world, the community, and this idea of cosmopolitan duty.
Right. Because all that internal preparation, all that work on character, far from making someone antisocial or withdrawn.
It's actually designed for the opposite.
Exactly. It's designed to prepare you for maximum positive impact, for public service.
The Stoics were really clear on this, weren't they? Building on Aristotle.
Yes, they fully agreed with Aristotle's starting point. Human beings are, by nature, social and political animals. It's just fundamental to who we are.
We don't exist in isolation.
Never. We're born into communities, these nested circles that keep expanding outwards. Your family, then your local area, your country. And ultimately, for the Stoics, the biggest circle is the community of all humankind, the cosmos itself.
The whole world community.
Right. And the entire point of all that deep inner work we discussed back in section 1, it's simply to allow you to turn back outwards, as Epictetus might say, and play your parts in these various communities, but now as more effective members.
So inner work fuels outer action. It's not an escape.
Not at all. It's the prerequisite for effective action. And this is where that really powerful, maybe slightly tricky concept of oikeiosis comes into play.
Oikeiosis, okay, often translated as appropriation or maybe extension of self-interest.
Yeah, those are common translations. It's about what we naturally recognize as belonging to or concerning ourselves. And Epictetus tackles this seemingly paradoxical idea head on.
The paradox being, how can doing everything for your own sake, which sounds selfish, possibly not be antisocial if you're a rational being?
Exactly. How does me first end up benefiting everyone? And this is where the real genius of the Stoic argument about natural law and duty shines.
How do they square that circle?
They argued that the rational animal's nature, our human nature, is actually so constituted, so designed, that it literally can attain none of its own goods unless it contributes something to the common interest.
Wait, say that again? I can only get my own good if I help the common good.
That's the core argument. In other words, the things that truly benefit me, according to Stoicism, my virtue, my integrity, my justice, my rationality, these are inherently things that also benefit the wider community.
How does that work? Give me an example.
Okay, think about justice. If I act justly in my dealings, am I doing that for my own good?
Well, yes, because justice is a virtue, and virtue is the only good.
Right, but by acting justly towards you, am I also benefiting you and the community?
Yes, obviously.
See, my own good and the common good are intertwined. They aren't in conflict for the rational person. If I act unjustly, I harm my own virtue, my true self-interest, and I harm the community.
Okay, I think I get that. There's an alignment.
There's a natural alignment. They sometimes use the analogy of Zeus. When Zeus acts as, say, the rain giver and fruit giver, he's acting according to his own divine rational nature. It perfects his nature to do so. But that very same action automatically makes him a public benefactor.
Right.
The rain benefits everyone. Our rational nature, they argued, is structured in fundamentally the same way. So the primary constituent, the basic drive in human beings, is actually this tendency to act for the common good. We're wired for it.
So things like theft, lying, pure selfishness. These aren't just bad for others, they're fundamentally irrational.
Exactly. They go against our own nature as rational social beings. And because they're irrational, they damage our own virtue, which means they ultimately hurt ourselves the most.
Okay, so if we have this innate drive and duty towards the common good, we're inevitably going to encounter a lot of suffering out there. Poverty, illness, loss, injustice. It's unavoidable.
Absolutely.
So how does the Stoic engage with all that suffering in the community without completely wrecking the inner tranquility they've worked so hard to build? Epictetus has advice on this, right? Something called controlled empathy.
Yes, controlled empathy. It's a really sophisticated kind of two-part instruction.
Okay, what's part one?
Part one is about the outward display. You need to show acknowledgement. Demonstrate your shared humanity, your connection. Epictetus even says you might need to share in another's groans, if that's appropriate.
So you don't just stand there like a cold statue.
No, definitely not. You acknowledge their pain, you validate their human experience, that's important.
Okay, and part two. This sounds like the crucial internal part, the restraint.
Exactly. Inwardly, while showing outward compassion, you must maintain an absolute refusal to be carried away by the impression that the other person's situation is objectively catastrophically bad in a way that should destroy your own composure.
Why? Because for the Stoic, the only real bad is vice, which is internal.
Precisely. Things like loss, pain, poverty, however difficult, are ultimately external indifference. They don't touch your core moral self, your virtue, unless you let them through bad judgment. So by controlling your own judgment about how truly terrible the external event is, you stop yourself from just collapsing into a puddle of shared misery.
So the little mantra you keep inside your head is something like, it's not what happened that's crushing this person. It's their judgment about what happened.
That's the core insight, exactly. And this restraint, it doesn't make you less compassionate. In fact, it arguably makes you a more effective helper.
How so?
Well, think about it. If you get completely overwhelmed and crushed by their judgment that the situation is a total catastrophe, you're no better off than they are. Now you're both suffering, and you're probably useless to them.
Right. Two people panicking doesn't help.
But if you can maintain your perspective, reminding yourself that their core self, their prohairesis, remains untouched and still capable of virtue despite the external difficulty, then you become a stable point, a moral anchor. From that place of stability, you can offer rational assistance, actual help, rather than just joining them in the panic.
That perspective seems especially vital when dealing with just difficult people. The ones who aren't suffering, obviously, but are maybe malicious or ungrateful or just plain irritating, which we all encounter daily.
Oh, absolutely. And Marcus Aurelius gives us that famous, incredibly practical morning exercise for bracing yourself for exactly that social landscape.
Right, the one where he tells himself what he's likely to face.
Yes, it's this remarkable bit of mental preparation. He literally tells himself, say to yourself each morning, today I will meet with people who are meddling, ungrateful, overbearing, deceitful, envious, and unsocial.
He really doesn't sugarcoat it, does he? He just lists them out.
No sugarcoating at all. He's facing reality head on.
But why rehearse that? Isn't that just dwelling on negative externals, the very things Stoics try to minimize the impact of?
But he's not rehearsing it to dread it or to wallow in it. He's doing it to inoculate himself, to remove the element of surprise and prevent that immediate, passionate, negative reaction when he does encounter it.
Okay, inoculation. Makes sense. But there's more to it, right? The key is what he tells himself next.
Exactly. That's the crucial step. Right after listing all those potential negative encounters, he immediately reminds himself why these people act this way.
Which is?
They suffer from these flaws, he says, through ignorance of good and bad.
Ignorance. Not malice, fundamentally, but ignorance.
Right. That intellectual framing changes the entire engagement. It transforms what looks like a moral failing on their part into a kind of intellectual error. They just don't know any better.
That really does shift the perspective.
Doesn't it? When you genuinely realize that the person acting badly is, in a sense, just unlearned or stumbling around in the dark, literally unable to tell the difference between what truly helps them, virtue, and what harms them, vice, it just fundamentally diminishes your impulse for that hot, passionate anger or desire for revenge.
Yeah, you don't get furious at a blind person for bumping into you.
Exactly, the principle. So this allows you to approach them with, as Marcus suggests, meekness, understanding, maybe pity, and a focus on either correction, if possible and appropriate, or just careful management of the situation rather than reacting with your own anger.
So the whole morning exercise is like a daily proactive application of that Seneca principle we talked about earlier.
Right.
Punishment or correction must be an expression not of anger, but of caution.
Precisely. You're being cautious because you recognize the wrongdoer is fundamentally confused, maybe misguided, rather than just fundamentally evil. It allows for a more measured, rational, and ultimately more effective social engagement, even with the most difficult people. Hashtag tag tag outro.
Wow. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, really tracing the full arc of Stoic social life. It starts deep inside with that solitary work on self-mastery.
Building that inner citadel.
And then it expands steadily outwards into these carefully chosen virtuous friendships, and finally into this broad sense of global cosmopolitan duty.
That's the trajectory.
So just to recap the main threads for everyone listening, Stoic friendship, real Stoic friendship, it demands virtue. That means being highly selective about who you let close, avoiding that contamination.
Right, and actively seeking out people you can learn from, those progressors, the prokoptontes, aiming for mutual improvement.
And importantly, it absolutely allows for deep but rational affection, those eupathei. So we can finally put that myth of the totally unfeeling sage to bed.
Please let's. It's time.
And ultimately, these close, demanding, virtuous relationships, they aren't the end goal. They serve as the essential training ground for our biggest responsibility: active, effective work within the community, driven by that concept of oikiosis.
That natural, rational extension of our own true self-interest towards the common good. Because our good and the common good are ultimately aligned.
So the synthesis seems really clear. True Stoic friendship isn't about finding buddies for convenience or boosting your social status or just having temporary fun.
No, not at its core. It's a serious commitment. It's about mutual moral and intellectual progress. The whole relationship is designed for virtue. If you're mainly looking for friends just to make you feel comfortable all the time,
Yeah.
the Stoics would gently, or maybe not so gently, challenge you. Are you seeking virtue? Or are you maybe just seeking distraction?
That's a tough question to sit with. So what does this all mean for the choices we make every day, about who we actually spend our precious time with?
Yeah.
We talked about Marcus Aurelius and his friend Rusticus, the one he
Yeah.
loved, but who also exasperated him because Rusticus kept pointing out his flaws. The truth teller. So, if the truest object of Stoic friendship really is that tender interest in the personal and intellectual development of your friend, well, that leaves us with a final, maybe provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over.
Okay, let's hear it.
If you look honestly at your closest circle right now, your main confidants, are you actively seeking out, or at least valuing, the friends who are most likely to challenge you, to constructively criticize your flaws?
Are you mostly surrounded by people who just tend to affirm whatever choices you're already making, people who make you feel comfortable?
It's a challenging thought. If the whole point of life for a Stoic is achieving virtue, and if a true friend's main goal is to help improve your reasoning power, your character, then maybe, just maybe, the most valuable person in your life isn't the one who always guarantees your comfort. But perhaps it's the one who's brave enough and cares enough to demand the absolute most from your character.
It's a real challenge, isn't it? To identify that progressor in your own life, that person who, maybe like Rusticus, makes you feel momentarily uncomfortable, or yes, even exasperated. Because they actually care more about your long-term moral altitude than your short-term happiness. So maybe the final task is, go find the friend who's willing to hold your mirror steady even when you don't particularly like the reflection.